some basics about the principles of semantic composition. There are three broad families of approaches to the systematic study of meaning in natural language. There is one that we might call denotational, sometimes called referential, that focuses on what's called the aboutness of language, namely the fact that language is used to convey information, the fact that we do that by establishing some kind of connections because certain internal symbols and things that are out there, the way information is conveyed by a potentially infinite range of symbols and objects that are external to the human organism. This family of approaches stems from work in philosophical logic, but also uses, presupposes work done in linguistic theory, especially the theory of natural language syntax. The second family of approaches takes what you might call a more internalist view, and it is mainly concerned with what you might call the cognitive significance of language, the fact that concepts are internally represented and combined to express an infinite range of thoughts. Again, much of the work on meaning that's done in artificial intelligence and in psychology assumes some version of this kind of semantics. Again, this family of approaches also has connections to natural language syntax, because you always presuppose that natural language syntax is something that's given, and the cognitive aspects of meaning are somehow constructed, are related in some fashion to what's provided by the natural language syntax, and then you combine them to get more complex concepts and so on. A third family of approaches concerns itself with social aspects of meaning, how we express meaning in our day-to-day interactions and so on. In this particular unit, and in fact throughout the course, we talk mainly about the first family of approaches, because we do believe, among other things, while we don't believe that there is a contradiction necessarily between these three families of approaches, any linguistic theory of meaning must tell us something about the way we establish connections between symbols that are internal and objects that exist outside, in the outside world. Now, to see what a compositional theory of semantics that deals with the aboutness of language would look like, we would first start with those linguistic expressions that appear to be referring expressions, namely these are expressions that establish some kind of a direct connection between the symbols of a language and things that are out there. On this kind of a view, referring expressions, for example, would include demonstrative pronouns and proper names. So, for example, suppose I point to a chair and I say, this chair is black. Now, what the noun phrase this chair does is refer to a thing. It establishes a connection between the noun phrase itself, which is an internal syntactic object, and connects it to the black chair that is being referred to. Now, of course, it has some independent content as well. So, for example, this chair must be distinguished from that chair. They mean different things. This chair has to be distinguished from this table. Again, they mean different things, but it is clear that there is a connection established between the noun phrase itself and the thing that's being referred to. Similarly, definite descriptions often have a similar function. While they have a descriptive content, they are often used to refer to things. So suppose I say, so you can look at this, you can verify this by looking at definite descriptions, say singular definite descriptions in English, which have a condition that whenever you use a definite description with a singular noun, there has to be a uniqueness condition. Okay, so even though it has a descriptive content, the descriptive content must be satisfied by one and only one thing. Okay, so for example, suppose I say the present king of India is a scholar of classical languages, or the book that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote is about Sherlock Holmes. Both of these sentences sound odd for the obvious reason: if you know that India doesn't have any king at present, and if you also know that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote more than one book, it is very odd, out of the blue, to use definite descriptions like the present king of India and the book that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote. Okay. However, in this respect, definite descriptions are exactly like proper names in that they are used to refer to a thing. So suppose I say Pavarotti is a corpulent tenor, or if I say Utpal was born in Kolkata. The proper names Pavarotti and Utpal can be taken to refer to things. Namely, in these cases, the persons being talked about. Now, what noun phrases, what referring noun phrases refer to can sometimes be complicated. We have some rough idea about what about the person Pavarotti and the person Utpal, even though even these simple examples involve complications. But there are referring noun phrases that could refer to things like sets or classes of objects. For example, if I say the students in my class are wearing green shirts today, or if I say the students in this class outnumber the students in that class, noun phrases like the students in this class, the students in my class, the students in that class, and so on, have to be taken to refer to classes of objects. They cannot refer to simple objects the way we think about simple objects. Similarly, if you go through the range of noun phrases that are somewhat like proper names, you will see that the objects noun phrases refer to could be substances, they could be qualities, they could be abstract objects of various kinds. So suppose I say platinum is an expensive metal, or if I say going to bed is healthy, kindness is an admirable quality. Platinum does not refer to actual pieces of the metal platinum. It refers to something more abstract. When I say platinum is an expensive metal, I don't necessarily mean a particle of platinum is necessarily expensive. What I'm referring to is it is something more abstract that philosophers have often called substances, and so on. Suppose I say going to bed is early. That's an activity. Kindness is an admirable quality. Kindness in this particular case is again an abstract quality, and so on. So there's a range of what actually referring expressions refer to is also a complicated question. Sometimes referring expressions could also refer to fictional objects. So suppose I say Kumbhakarna is an idiot. Kumbhakarna happens to be a fictional character in a certain in certain texts, and so on. And we can make true and false statements depend on what role they play in fiction. So, and we understand what they mean, even though in some sense they don't refer to anything that actually exists. They do have something like a fictional reality. You could take them to, they refer to something that plays a certain role in fiction. Now, while we can take referring expressions to refer to things, they raise various philosophical puzzles, even in the very simple cases. So, suppose I say there is a person called Utpal who's lecturing to you right now, and suppose I say if Utpal were not born in India and came from Delhi, he wouldn't be speaking Bangla so well. Now, this sentence in 7 makes perfect sense and could be taken to be true even in many circumstances in which 3 is true, okay, 3 being the sentence that Utpal was born in Calcutta, and yet we have a sense that Utpal refers to the same object in both sentences. Okay. So, in one case you are asking someone to consider circumstances in which the person who was actually born in Kolkata were born somewhere else, okay? And yet we somehow have the intuition that in both cases we are referring to the same object. And you can notice that when our use of proper names often involves can involve considering counterfactual. Sometimes we can never be quite sure what the thing is that we are referring to. Okay. So, consider the sentence, Baghdad is the capital of Iraq. Now, Baghdad is a city that happens to date to ancient times, has been destroyed several times in history, and so clearly is not the same physical object over the entire course of its history. But we seem to have no problem using the proper name Baghdad for something in all of its incarnations. Now, some philosophers and linguists have taken this to indicate that one could dispense with the notion of reference in semantic theory altogether. Okay. Now, this doesn't necessarily follow. Okay. For one, the notion of an individual or reference is needed to support a theory of entailment and the various semantic phenomena that we have already discussed in one of the previous units. If you want to have a theory of entailment, if you want to have an account of entailment relations, if you want to give an account of presuppositions, if you want to give an account of implicatures and so on, it does look like you seem to need something like a theory of reference. Okay. Now, it is a complicated issue what we might do about these puzzles, and we won't get into that right now. I will simply say that one possibility might be that these notions might simply link semantics to theories about how various objects are conceptualized. Okay. So, this would establish a link between, say, denotational theories of meaning and the internalist theories of meaning, the ones that deal with concepts and so on, that I had mentioned earlier when I was talking. We saw that there are noun phrases which, at least in their simple incarnations, can be taken to be referring expressions. So, we looked at proper names, we looked at demonstratives, we looked at definite descriptions, and so on. And while all of these, the semantics of all of these involve various controversial questions, at least at a first approximation, you might take them to be referring expressions. What other things can be taken, what other linguistic expressions can be taken to refer to things? What about sentences? What about declarative sentences, sentences that we know can be true or false? Do they have a reference? If they do have a reference, what is their reference? Now, in order to look at these questions, consider the following sentence. It snows in Kashmir. Okay? It's a linguistic expression that's capable of being true and false. What is its reference? Now, we don't have a priori intuitions about what the reference of a declarative sentence might be. However, there is an argument due to the philosopher Frege that basically says if declarative sentences can be taken to have a reference, their reference must be something like their truth value, okay? The value, whether they are true or false. This is sometimes called the slingshot argument, and the name slingshot comes from another modern philosopher, John Perry, who basically, Frege didn't quite give the argument very explicitly, but it's implicit in much of what he wrote about the subject. But there is a formalized and made more precise version of the argument that comes from John Perry that goes as follows. Let us assume that there are two principles that seem to be a priori true. Principle A is the following. If two expressions A and B have the same content, that is, they entail each other, they have the same reference. Principle B. If an expression contains an expression B and we replace B in A with another expression C which has the same reference as B to get A prime, then the reference of the resulting expression A prime must be the same as that of A. This is a very old principle that goes back again to the work of the philosopher Leibniz, and it's often called Leibniz's law. Now, the truth of these two principles can be illustrated by looking first at expressions that are clearly referring expressions. So, say definite description. So, suppose I say John's sister and the daughter of John's parents are content synonymous, okay, as they say the same things, okay. While the notion of entailment does not apply directly to NPs, we can extend the notion to NPs by saying that two NPs, NP1 and NP2, entail each other if and only if every statement containing NP1 entails the corresponding statement obtained by replacing NP1 with NP2 in it and vice versa. Okay. Clearly, the two noun phrases just mentioned have the same reference. To illustrate B, for example, we simply note that, for example, the noun phrase, the husband of John's sister, has the same reference as the husband of the daughter of John's parents. Okay. This means that something like B has to be right. Now, to come back to the reference of declarative sentences, consider two sentences that have no semantic connection whatsoever except the fact that they share the same truth value. That means they are either both false or they are both true. So, let's suppose we take two statements that we know to be false. Okay. Take the following sentence, Pavarotti is French and it never snows in Kashmir. Now, these sentences are both false and they have nothing common semantically. Now, consider the following four statements in 11. Suppose I compare the first, Pavarotti is French. B, the truth value of the sentence Pavarotti is French equals T. T is the symbol used for the truth value true. C, the truth value of the sentence it never snows in Kashmir is T, and D, it never snows in Kashmir. So, we are using T and F, uppercase T, uppercase F for true and false, and we all know T is not equal to F. Okay? Now, you can convince yourself that 11A and 11B entail each other. So, suppose I say Pavarotti is French. It's true if and only it's true in exactly the same circumstances in which the truth value of the sentence Pavarotti is French equals T. Similarly, 11C and 11D entail each other. Okay? By principle A, then, 11A has the same reference as 11B, and 11C has the same reference as 11D. Moreover, the reference of the definite description, the truth value of the sentence Pavarotti is French, is the same as the reference of the definite description, the truth value of it never snows in Kashmir, namely the truth value false. Now, by principle B, it follows then that 11B and 11C must have the same reference. Since 11C is simply obtained from NP, by replacing the NP, the truth value of the sentence Pavarotti is French with another NP with the same reference, namely the description, the truth value of the sentence, it never snows in Kashmir. It follows then that 11A has the same reference as 11D. Okay? So, 11B now you can show has the same reference as 11C. Because 11C has the same reference as 11D, it means 11B has the same reference as 11D, and since 11B has the same reference as 11A, they all have the same reference. Now, what might this reference be? We chose our examples by looking at two sentences that share no semantic property other than the fact that they're both false. And the result would be the same if they were both true. So, the only possible candidate for the reference of the two sentences, it means, would be whatever their truth value is. Okay? So, if a declarative sentence can be said to have a reference, it must be its truth value. Now, this is what Frege in fact concluded. The problem, however, is that this at first instance appears fairly counterintuitive. It's fairly counterintuitive because while we just concluded that the reference of a sentence is its truth value, it is quite clear that that's not the meaning that the sentences have. Okay? So, even though the two sentences I gave, it never snows in Kashmir and Pavarotti is French, are both false, they have very different contents, and that's because they can be true in different circumstances. It just happens that they are both false, but their truth value doesn't vary in the same way depending on the circumstance. So, if the reference of sentences is their truth value, what more is there to be said? Now, what Frege proposed was that you have to distinguish meaning from reference, and he had a proposal that basically said that all linguistic expressions have a reference, but they also have something that he called sense. Okay, sense is, you might think of sense as something like meaning, although Frege wasn't quite explicit about this, but he thought that senses had to do with what he called a mode of presentation. There were things could be presented in more than, the same thing could be presented in more than one way, and depending on how you presented that thing, sentences containing linguistic expressions that had different modes of presentation but referred to the same thing, nevertheless could make a difference to the meaning of the sentences they were part of. Okay? So, what now should we say about what a compositional denotational semantic theory must look like? Now, to answer this question, we must think about what someone must know if we say that they understand the meaning of a declarative sentence. So, suppose I say Obama talked to the Pope on December 25th, 2015 by phone. Clearly, understanding the meaning of this sentence doesn't require knowing whether this sentence is true. However, it does involve knowing the conditions under which this sentence could be true. Now, some philosophers like Davidson have gone further and argued that that's all that is needed for a compositional denotational semantic theory. Basically, what your compositional semantic theory must do is give an account of what are called the truth conditions of declarative sentences. This was eventually formalized by another philosopher, Tarski, who, while he was talking about more formalized languages, basically said that the relevant criterion for a theory of truth would be something like a semantic theory must have rules that provide rules of semantic composition that have as a consequence statements of the following type. A sentence S is true in a circumstance nu if and only if P, where P is some condition that's satisfied, that's external to the language that we are talking about. A theory of this type is clearly needed for the semantics of declarative sentences. But not all utterances of natural language are declarative sentences. What about questions? What about commands? Which students came to the freshers' party last Wednesday? Jump out of the window. One is a question, the other is a command. There are fragments, all kinds of things in natural language. It turns out that even though a semantic theory based on truth cannot give a direct account of the meaning of these kinds of sentence types, we see that understanding, say, the meaning of a question, for example, involves knowing the conditions under which what kinds of statements are proper answers to a question. Understanding an imperative sentence, for example, involves understanding when an order has been complied with, and so on. Okay? So, in other words, once we do this indirectly, we can see that a theory of truth will still have things to say about the semantics of both declaratives and imperatives. Obviously, it will also say something about fragments, because fragments, interjections, and so on, they all involve propositional knowledge of some kind. What a semantic theory based on truth will do is give some kind of an account of the propositional content behind these kinds of linguistic expressions that are not declarative sentences.